hard not to drop from the side of that five-story Stanford parking garage in the early morning of May 8th, 2017. But it was even harder not to drop out of school in the chaotic and confusing months that followed.
Zach and I had been dating for almost a year when he had his first psychotic break.
I was on campus and it was like 3 or 4 in the morning and I was working, for my quals exams. But then I just became like fully unable to like operate a computer, and it's like hard to describe.
It was in the middle of the night and a friend went and picked him up. He called a bunch of people. I had known that he was sort of spiraling for a few weeks, because for the past few weeks he'd been like very emotional and would really get stuck on certain themes of feeling guilty or feeling like he wasn't doing enough, but he had this giant qualifying exam coming up.
And I left my building. I was like yelling inside the building. I left my building, and then I was like convinced people were following me everywhere. And then it sort of like just all came to a head when I was like at this parking garage, and I don't know what would have happened if I didn't call my mom.
When his friend brought him to where I was living at 6 in the morning, I thought that it was some sort of like joke, or like he was not being serious because he wasn't making eye contact, and he wasn't able to speak, and he kept saying, "I don't want to see her, I don't want to see her."
I was just completely out of touch with what was actually going on. For me, the psychosis was not like, it wasn't a big, it was like those first few weeks, and then beyond that it was much more like the recovery and dealing with like my own sense of like identity afterward. I've known a lot of people I care for and love who have mental illness. I was still stigmatizing it in my own mind, and I was like, oh my goodness, like if I'm bipolar, like that means somehow I'm less competent. Like maybe there's something wrong with me.
I had my own stigma about bipolar and mental health before Zach had his break. And so seeing a loved one go through it obviously forced me to confront very quickly a lot of that stigma, and to realize that, here's someone who's just in a place of pain, and it's important to help him, but then also it's important to recognize that he can go on and live a very full and successful life, and not to hold him back and feel like, oh, he's not capable because he has a mental illness.
It started as much worse than just like a lack of confidence. It started as just like this like complete loss of identity, where I was like, oh, I can't even function. Those thoughts played largely on my mind early on. And so since then, it's been this like slow build of getting back up to confidence and being like, this is just like another part of the human experience. Sort of just like pitched the name of it to her, and at that point it was solely like just an idea.
When he brought it up, I immediately was like, yes, that's super powerful. We should definitely do it on stage, even though neither of us had any theater experience, but I really wanted to do it on stage in front of an audience, because I just know that unless you have someone looking you eye to eye, it's really easy to try and distance yourself from these issues, because some of them are heavy and because people are afraid.
When we were sort of going through my initial diagnosis, like she had a lot of difficulty finding relatable stories out there, and everything online was like sort of like these WebMD articles that were like, oh yeah, if you have bipolar, if you have, what have it, you'll permanently be different. You'll never be the same again. Maybe your personality is going to completely change. And I think in some cases it does, but like, unfortunately, like the internet and what's put out there is like just these horror stories and these like worst case scenarios.
We went through a few different kind of ideas. Originally we were thinking of soliciting stories only from around Stanford, and then actually holding workshops with people so that they could edit their own stories. And then over time that sort of morphed into well, let's solicit stories from all around the country so that we get a wider representation of experiences and then get their permission to edit them.
Where we got almost all of our stories was actually through Facebook, like mental health advocacy groups, mental health illness groups. We just got a flood of stories in December and through January. We probably got like 45 or 50 stories submitted from people, you know, of all walks of life from all over the place. Elisa and I were actually amazed because in like their raw form, we probably had like, you know, we had a couple dozen like very well-written stories. And so we narrowed it down to about 20 stories.
Knowing that we knew nothing about lighting design or set design, we decided, well, you know what, that's okay. Why don't we just showcase the stories themselves? Let's keep it really simple. And so that's sort of where you get the spotlight effect, where people are just walking in and out.
Perhaps the most difficult part of being obsessive compulsive is being acutely aware of the absurdity of my fears.
Charming, fun, spirited. That was the feedback I kept getting on my trip to LA.
He started to think that he could get AIDS out of the air. And so he got in the car and he drove until he ran out of gas. And the police found him in a ditch. And he was still talking and not making any sense. They took him to the hospital and he was diagnosed with manic depression. And they started him on lithium and he said he was feeling much better now. They auditioned a lot of people, and so I think actually people were up for the task of bringing these different stories to life. I was just really impressed.
It's so different for different people, and like it ranges from absolutely tragic, devastating, life-changing in negative ways to, you know, like sometimes humorous to powerful to uplifting to like these amazing stories of resilience and recovery. And so for me, I think that was eye-opening.
It's surprising to hear how almost everyone had a different one that they connected with. So my hope is just that our audience members, they came and that they connected with at least one story. Because I think as soon as you do that and as soon as you feel that compassion and empathy go out for one person up on stage, it allows you to recognize like, oh, there's other people out there like that. Oh, that's a part of the spectrum of experiences with mental illness. And I think it just opens your mind to the possibilities of what life is like for people with mental illness or people who've been touched by people with mental illness.
If people in general, and Stanford students in particular, realize that, you know, who you are includes a summation of things that happen over time, and mistakes are recoverable, and quote failures are recoverable, and things that are difficult imposed on you from other places are also recoverable. That given a chance, we're all much more resilient than